Great to be joined by Professors Ian Anderson and Keith Smith and talk about voting again. Once again, it's such an important topic because we're this close to the election. I know that there's lots of concerns about how do I submit the ballot? Am I getting the ballot? Is there a ballot that I should receive? Should I go somewhere else? Lots of different methods of voting. And of course, the question that always is raised now, it seems, with elections is voter fraud and election security and things of that nature. So I want to start first with the mail-in ballots because it seems like most people should have received them by now, and if not now, in the next few days or so. Is that an accurate statement? I think all it looks like with head nodding, I can say maybe all three of us have
Yeah.
gotten ours.
So registrars were required by California law to put it in the mail no later than October 7th. So it depends on, did they put it in ahead of the October 7th deadline? Did they do it right at the October 7th deadline? And then it depends on, mail delivery to your address. If you live in an urban area, you're more likely to receive the ballot relatively quickly because there's going to be lots of mail delivery services. If you're a little in a more rural area, it may take a few more days. But everybody by this point should have received the ballot or their ballot if they were registered to vote.
And I've received mine already, and so it was very easy.
It really just takes filling out the ballot with a pen and making sure that you're getting in, filling
Well,
in the
they
marks. Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, what were you saying?
Yeah, I mean, the really important thing is not just filling out the ballot, but you have to sign the back of the envelope. Right?
Yeah.
If you do not sign the outside of the envelope, your ballot will not be counted because that is the way that we verify that the person voting is, in fact, the person who ought to be voting on that ballot. They check the signature. And so if the signature does not match or is absent, then the ballot will not be counted. The registrar is obligated to reach out to you and tell you that there's an error on your ballot, and you have the opportunity then to go in and remedy that. But the really key thing is to put the signature on the ballot, on the envelope for your ballot.
And then I'd add to that is that if you want to check and see if your ballot's been counted, you keep that stub, and then you can go to usually the website of your local elections office. I know at Kern elections office, you're able to track your ballot as well. So if you have any questions, I always can encourage people, ask your local elections office, reach out there because they will solve any issues you have.
Hey, you guys got ahead of me. I was just saying, hey, fill out your ballot, then we can go to the signature, and then you put it in the mailbox or the drop box. But that's right. I mean, that's the key ingredient there is making sure you sign it, and of course, making sure I guess you have a good signature. That's one that's comparable to what you normally use. So if you have something that's identifiable, that's usually a good thing, and
Yeah, the
that's good.
the California Voter Foundation a couple of years ago did a study on why ballots were not counted. So what was the thing that made them invalid? And the number one cause was the signature, and two groups in particular were more likely to have their ballots invalidated because of it, the signature doesn't match. One is older voters, because as we age, our signature changes. And, I registered to vote when I was 18. I am no longer 18, right? And so the signature on my voter registration may have migrated a little bit. I've updated it since then, but if you have not updated your signature in a long time, then there's some possibility that what you are doing now is different from what you did when you initially registered. And the other group is really young voters who are still figuring out what their signature is supposed to look like they're trying out different things. And so they change their signature, not realizing that the signature on the ballot needs to match what they did when they registered to vote. And so if you've tried out something or if you've changed your signature recently, then there may be an issue.
That makes me think of when I was younger, right? And we have, people trying to have these really fancy signatures and all these doodles, right? And then it becomes very complicated to do that when you're older and you're signing all the time. I would also suggest too, is if you're listening to this and you go, man, that's me. I haven't, updated my signature since I was 18. You are able to do that if you're concerned about that with the local elections office. You don't have to wait for them to contact you. I would also say just an interesting caveat to all this is now that we're not really teaching cursive in the school district, it's very interesting to see what the signatures are going to be, because I've been starting to see signatures that come through that are just printed. And so that is, I don't know how that's going to play into some of this as well. But again, your signature and your identity is very important.
Yeah, and the methods, of course, of submission for that are through, when you have to use your signature would be through a mail-in ballot, one that you would drop into your mailbox. You can also drop it into a ballot drop box. I believe we have around 20 in the county, in Kern County, as far as that's concerned. And then, of course, there are several throughout the state as well.
Plug for Bakersfield College. They
Oh, yeah.
have a drop box right there. So any
Yeah.
students listening to this, go drop off your ballot there. I think same thing at Taft.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important to note because youth participation, of course, is the thing that a lot of people are always concerned about. Of course, there's the political interest in it. Then it's just the civic duty thing that we were talking about before, which I guess cursive is part of the civic duty thing that we have to get back as well. Penmanship classes. Look, I took cursive and my signature still looks horrible. I won't print it here for everyone here, so that way it's not stolen, but it's not good. So I think maybe that's possibly a good thing. It's not identifiable by a lot of people. As far as that's concerned, so you have that. And then, of course, you also have the same day voting as well, which is traditional. You want to be in line by 8 p.m. You can vote after 8 p.m., but you have to be in line by 8 p.m. on that election night. And of course, on days that early voting is allowed for as well, to be able for it to count. Because if you get there to the polls after that time, if you try to submit, if you have a mail-in ballot that's not postmarked by that time, and of course, if you try to attempt to put in a drop box by that time, it will already be taken away. So that's why the 8 p.m. deadline is so important, as well for November 5th. Something to just touch on as well. I know when we talk about voter participation, and there's lots of concerns about mail-in ballots, and that would come from a lot of times information that may be skewed from what you hear on the news. It could be just a lack of information or thoughts that some ways that people vote in this state are different than others, and then which is the truth. And you take information from other states. Can we talk about just what is voter fraud? What does that look like, and how frequent is it? Either professor, whoever wants to take that first.
So, voter fraud is the act of casting a ballot that you are not legally entitled to cast. So, casting a ballot for someone else, um, casting a ballot in more than one location, because you're legally only allowed to vote in the location where you currently reside. And so it's just casting a ballot that you should not be casting by the law. And the best data that we have is that voter fraud is exceedingly rare, that it almost never happens. There are cases where it does happen. They get lots of media attention because of kind of the political debate or dialogue around voter fraud. But out of the 100 million plus votes that are going to be cast in this election, almost 150 million votes that are going to be cast in this election, we're talking about a couple hundred across the entire nation. Right.
Statistically insignificant number.
Yeah. And so it is, it is a valid concern. We only want people who are entitled to vote to be casting a ballot. We don't want people who shouldn't be voting to be voting in our elections, right? That is an entirely valid concern. The emphasis on it, however, is completely disproportionate to the rate at which it happens. Right? There are other things that we could do to make elections better that aren't focusing on voter fraud and ballot security and those kinds of questions, because the registrars and the states already do a very good job making sure that the people who should be voting are the only ones whose ballots are counted.
Absolutely. And I can't echo that enough. I mean, the rhetoric out there, especially right now, about voter fraud and casting certain groups as the culprits of that is really a lot of political propaganda. I was just thinking, with the 2000 election and just some of the clips that were happening about the dogs that were voting and deceased people that were supposedly voting. And that was now 24 years ago, right? And so that same narrative is utilized as a tool to get people to vote or not vote or to drive this narrative. But part of the thing I'd like to jump off of what Professor Smith was talking about, there are ways to make this better. And part of it is actually understanding what you're voting for, right? Opening up that ballot packet. It's because it's not just about the presidential election coming forward. And at least in Kern County, we have several key districts and positions that are up for reelection. And so when we talk about, government, where government lives, it really truly lives at the local level where you're able to engage very closely. So, for example, right, the ballots initiatives that are out there, my students have an assignment where they take a bill and they look at both sides and present it. What's interesting right now, what's getting the most traction, at least in my microcosm, is the increase in minimum wage. It seems like most students are very interested in looking at both sides of that. But then you go these other propositions, nobody even looking at it all. And so when we talk about political self-efficacy, it's like we really need to make sure that we're not just criticizing the system without truly participating in it. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing for our elections office is that, they do a phenomenal job. Anytime we've had a recount or a question, they have handled it. There's never been any issues, but there's still this kind of ghost that seems to haunt every election about the potential of voter fraud and things like that. And although we don't want to minimize the significance of it, I would much rather prefer that you, or when you're casting your ballot, you have read through everything and you're aware that the decision, the vote you're making is truly yours and not something that's forced upon you because of rhetoric or fear or things like that.
Yeah, and something that I think I just want to actually point out that happened to me in Kern County. I don't know if this has happened to anybody else yet. I received my information guide after I received my ballot recently, which is a little odd. But if you remember that an information guide's coming for anyone that's watching in Kern County, in case you've received your ballot yet, haven't received that, it was an odd timing thing. So if that's happened to other people, if you want to have that knowledge before you vote. I think something else I want to point out too. I know we were talking about voter fraud real quick, but you can leave some things blank too if you don't understand it or you're not sure what you want to do. You don't have to fill out every single one. Although I don't think it comes with an A+ if you do from other professors, right? You don't have to.
I think that's a pass, right? If you genuinely do not feel like you have a choice to make in a contest, then it is perfectly fine to leave it blank. There's no penalty for leaving it blank. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I've done it in the past because there just was not information on local candidates in a couple places where I've lived, and so having no information at all, right? I chose not to cast a ballot in those contests, and that is a perfectly valid thing to do.
And also, you need to focus on like where you live too. There's some candidates that you might be hearing things about, but they're not your congressperson, right? So it doesn't matter if Valadeo is not your congressperson or not. Then it doesn't really matter, right? So focus your time on what directly impacts you. So kind of circling back, I'll give you a little bit of a hard time, Will, but that voter guide is also available online at our elections office as well. And so, but if you're and just teasing you, Will, but in general, if anybody didn't receive that, right, it is always available. I've been watching it. My students have access to it, so there's no excuse for them not to have read through the ballot, right? But I just, again, I try to go back to the information is readily available to you. And so part of your civic duty is you do need to seek that out. The advertisements out there, they're giving you a certain frame, but it's ultimately up to you to really make those decisions and seek that information out.
No, I think more information the merrier. I mean, for people that didn't receive it like me until a couple days after I received the ballot, it's great to have. And I think to the point of what we were talking about before, as well when it comes to filling information out and of course when you look at your TV ads, you're looking for the Valadeo Salas race because that's the one everyone's advertising for. And then, of course, you look to go on your ballot and you find out that you're in a district that has Fong and Boudreaux, and you haven't seen ads for either of them, of course, because Boudreaux has since decided not to run this campaign. And funny enough, when you bring that up, something that I talked with Sheriff Boudreaux about when he was running was he said, people were all looking for him on the ballot in the primary because they lived in Tulare County, and Tulare County is split. Part of Tulare County is
Mhm.
one of the districts, part of Tulare County is the other district. And he said he had so many people talk to him say, "Hey, I was looking for you, couldn't find you on there." And then I think a lot of them wrote him in the assembly district because, of course, that was a whole another thing too, where Fong was on the ballot for both the
Mhm.
assembly and for the House. So it was just a very odd circumstance and situation. But it just goes to show that, you're looking at all of what's presented in the media, on TV and online. But at the end of the day, you want to pay attention closely to that voter guide, which, of course, is available at Current Vote, as Professor Anderson was just saying there. So that's an important point to make as well. Something I want to talk about. I know a lot of times it's not a popular term among some people. A lot of times they'll try and throw this term into the voter fraud and just voter unfairness, perhaps. But what is ballot harvesting?
Ballot harvesting is when instead of each person returning the ballot on their own, they take the ballot to an organization who collects a large number of ballots and then submits all of those ballots on behalf of the voters. And in order to do that in California, you have to sign a box, a separate box on the envelope saying that you're giving someone else permission to submit this on your behalf. But it enables people to go to voting events, to do it at their church, to go to a party, and kind of collectively celebrate or collectively vote, and then all of the ballots are going to be submitted as a set, rather than each person then going off and putting it in the mail or in a drop box, or taking it to a polling place to turn it in. Sometimes people go around neighborhoods and say, hey, I'll take your ballot for you. I would be very suspicious of anybody that came to my door and said, hey, I see you haven't voted yet. I'd be happy to take your ballot for you, because if I don't know that person, I have no confidence that they're going to actually submit my ballot. But so this is the thing that people have pejoratively called ballot harvesting. And I do think that in the past, Democratic aligned groups were better at it than Republican aligned groups. And so there was a perception of partisan unfairness there. But over time, Republican groups have gotten really good at doing the same kind of thing. And so that kind of partisan perception is waning. It still exists because of the historical pattern, but it's evening out a lot.
Well, and the concern was, I know that a lot of people would suggest that the concern was, especially amongst the conservative groups, was, hey, we're giving you these ballots back to you unfilled, and you're going to put all of them in there, or they will be manipulated by the group. That's where the conspiracy would have come from, right? Because essentially
But we haven't
you're giving your ballot away to somebody else.
and that's a valid concern, I would say. But I mean, just going back to what Professor Smith was saying, is that you should know who the organization is that you're engaging with. So if it's your church, I mean, you're probably familiar with, the integrity of that organization. I also think that these types of events get to people that are disenfranchised a lot of times. Maybe they don't necessarily understand the process. They're reaching out to these other groups to try to get more engagement with it. But with anything, like I said, you can always track your ballot. You can always see, if your ballot was counted right, if they didn't just put it all in a big bag and throw it in a trash can. It does require, it always comes back to, like, we can have all these theories and these conspiracy theories that people like to run with because it's good for elections sometimes. But reality is, it's still up to you, if you to make that decision, and you need to make sure that you trust the organization, you keep your stub if necessary, you know where to go if you have questions, right? I always go back to, it's up to you, even if you're allowing another group to assist you, to make sure you know how your vote's being cast and where it's going.
Yeah, and I think to what we were talking about before is of course you can track your ballots and you can track if there's been any damage to them as well, and you can expect Professor, as you were saying before, Professor Smith, about if you get that, you'll get a notification from your local Kern County, or your local county clerk, in our case Kern County clerk, and of course clerks from those other parts of the state and through the local registrars, perhaps even Secretary of State as well.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, how do I want to say it? In California, we have made the choice that we want as many people as possible to vote, and we want as many votes as possible to count. And so we have built our system to make it really easy for people to register to vote, really easy for people to actually vote. And then if anything goes wrong, relatively easy to fix the issue if something does go wrong, because we want people to vote and we want their votes to count.
Great. Any concerns or any questions that you think we didn't bring up? I think the only one is, what do you do if you maybe accidentally rip your ballot or shred it? The dog eats it. Dog eats your homework, right?
So if you like, even if you just make a mistake on your ballot, you're filling it in and you go, oh no, that's not who I meant to vote for, and you know need to make a change, then take it to a polling place. Hand it to them and say, I made a mistake. They will take your old one. They will print you a new one on demand, and then you can fill it out and move on with your life. Again, because we want you to vote here in the state of California. We want your vote to count. So if you've lost it, go to a polling place, right? They'll give you what's called a provisional ballot just to make sure that the vote, you're not lying to them and you've already sent in a mail ballot and now you're trying to vote a second time. And they'll verify that they haven't received a ballot from somewhere else from you before they count the new ballot. And that's part of why it takes so long for us to count votes here in the state of California, why it's going to be mid-December before we know who won in most cases. But just go to your local registrar, go to a polling place. They will help you. Doesn't matter what your issue was. If you have an issue, go talk to them. They'll help you.
So I think the theme we keep hearing, well, is rely on your local elections office, right? You also keep hearing we have faith in them and that it's really driven by you. So if you like, this would be an exciting time. And I think the other thing to point out is that the elections office is nonpartisan. So it is irrelevant of your political ideology when you go in and ask for support. So the narrative that's out there that sometimes that these individuals are somehow doing nefarious things because of their political ideology, that is just not true. And so I think that we need to remember that and not have that fear of using and these are our friends and neighbors. I mingle with them all the time, right? Nicest people. So just remember that. Don't let this kind of rhetoric out there keep you from accessing the information that you need.
I think last point to make is, how long can we expect for this election to be counted for? I know you're saying mid-December. There's definitely the possibility that some of these races are going to go that long, especially the one that's in our area here, our neck of the woods with Valadeo and Salas, and of course I imagine Duarte and Gray a little bit further north. And there's a number of other House races throughout California that are going to be tight ones.
Yeah, I'm hearing internal polling numbers up here in Stockton for Hart or Lincoln that it's a very close race. So yeah, lots around the state are going to be close, have the potential to be close. So the county registrars have until December 5th to certify the results and send them to the state. And then the state has until the 13th of December to certify its entire vote and send the results to Congress. So it really is going to be a month plus before we know what the final results are here in the state of California. And that's because the registrars are going to be doing all of the necessary work to make sure that the votes that have been cast are valid and that they ought to be counted. And that just takes time. Never mind all of the lawsuits that'll happen in close races and the recounts and all of that stuff. Just the act of doing their job, given the way that we've set up voting in the state of California, requires them to spend a lot of time making sure that the people who are voting are the ones who can vote.
And I think you should recognizing that you will hear rhetoric saying, well, it's taking a long time, question, and that is just how the process works. So I would caution people from having emotions or feelings about it until they've really given it at least until December 5th, because that is just part of the process, right? And I think that's important for people to understand, because you will hear narrative critiquing and saying various things. And I guarantee, I agree with Professor Smith that especially with some of the elections that we're dealing with right now, there will probably be recounts and there will probably be questions. So expect that. It does not mean that the election was somehow invalid.
And I think what you can do in that whole window of time is you're waiting the results. You can practice your signature, because that's going to be very important to do.
Yes.
going forward, of course. So thank you so much, both of you. We appreciate it. And of course, looking forward to continuing to speak with you in the lead up to the election. We're just a few weeks away. And of course, as we were just joking about there, once it hits the 5th, it's all done. There's nothing after that. So
Right.
It's done. You don't have to think about it anymore for 4 years.
thank you so much. Appreciate your time and have a good rest of your day.